Sang-man, in his 30s, having endured the loneliness and pain of life for so long, finally chose to take his own life on Children's Day. At that moment, the phone behind him suddenly rang. Sang-man thought someone was coming to save him, but unexpectedly, it was his landlord demanding rent. This further solidified Sang-man's resolve to die. After guzzling several large gulps of tap water, his consciousness began to fade, and he soon collapsed to the floor. Unfortunately, the landlord arrived just in the nick of time. This was his 6th failed suicide attempt. For the 7th time, he simply jumped into the river, but landed right next to the rescue team. As expected, Sang-man's suicide attempt failed again. When he awoke in the hospital, everyone in the ward looked at him with strange eyes. Confused, Sang-man turned his head and saw a man smoking next to him. He kindly reminded the uncle that smoking was prohibited in the hospital, but the uncle ignored him and leisurely puffed out smoke rings. Just as he was speechless, a nurse came over, grabbed his hand, and took the cigarette from him. Sang-man was momentarily confused. How could the cigarette be in his hand? Seeing his strange behavior, the nurse concluded that he must have a mental problem and sent him to the psychiatric department. On the way, he curiously asked, "Will you come with us, uncle?" The nurse, seeing him alone, could only look helpless. When the doctor asked him why he wanted to commit suicide, Sang-man said he had no hope of living. Just then, he heard the sound of a woman crying. After searching, Sang-man found an old woman hiding in the doctor's cabinet, crying. Sang-man asked the doctor, "Why did you lock her in the cabinet?" This further confused the doctor, because as far as he could see, there was nothing inside the cabinet. Sang-man began to curse the doctor as a beast. Now, he was diagnosed without even meeting an examination and was immediately taken away for hospitalization. That night, Sang-man suddenly needed to pee and went to the restroom, only to find a grandfather squatting at the nurse's station. He blew all the documents off the table onto the floor. Then, while the nurse bent over to pick them up, crouched there to watch. The grandfather turned and spotted the curious Sang-man. Then, his head suddenly grew larger, frightening Sang-man. Just as Sang-man was about to leave, the uncle and aunt from earlier reappeared. Realizing he might have seen a ghost, Sang-man hurried back to the ward. When he turned around, he saw the 3 men again, floating in the air, waiting to see him and demanding to share his body. Sang-man fainted from the shock. He wasn't awakened until the next morning by the doctor on rounds. Sang-man thought everything from yesterday was just a dream, but then he turned around and was surprised to find a little boy beside the 3 people from yesterday. And just like yesterday, the doctors and nurses couldn't see them. At that moment, Sang-man finally understood that people who desperately wanted to die could actually see ghosts. A few days later, Sang-man was finally discharged from the hospital, but the 4 ghosts still followed him. They haunted Sang-man wherever he went. To the outside world, he looked like a frail, emaciated man, nearly dead. Every time he left the house, he felt exhausted. The once lonely home now felt like 4 generations living under one roof. Not only that, the 4 took turns haunting Sang-man, doing the things they loved most in life. The uncle smoked his entire cigarette case in just a few days, smoking what he would have smoked in a year. Grandpa used Sang-man's body to drink, often finishing over 20 bottles of sake in a single sitting. After each session, he would not only stand on the balcony and urinate, but also verbally tease the older sister next door. The lively little boy used Sang-man's body to eat voraciously, always consuming high-calorie foods. His refrigerator was overflowing with snacks. Although the crying aunt rarely used his body, she had a peculiar habit. Every day, when Sang-man woke up, he would find his aunt lying next to him, staring at him, a habit that always startled him. After a period of physical and mental torture, the 4 people finally gave way. Sang-man could not understand why these 4 ghosts were targeting him when his own life was already difficult enough. He couldn't help but curse at them, "Don't you have anyone at home who performs rituals?" However, they remained unmoved. Due to the heavy negative energy in the house, Sang-man was too cold to sleep at night. Even if he woke up in the middle of the night and turned the heat up to full blast, a thick layer of frost would still form inside. Frustrated beyond belief, he sought help from a master. How could he drive the 4 away? The master told him, "Just grant their wishes, and they will vanish from the face of the earth." Upon returning home, Sang-man asked what they wished for. Grandpa spoke first, hoping Sang-man could help him find a camera. Sang-man and Grandpa searched every camera store in the city, but ultimately failed to find the camera he was looking for. Sang-man hoped Grandpa could give him a clue, and Grandpa said the camera was in the hands of an old policeman. Sang-man begged Grandpa why he hadn't told him earlier, and Grandpa explained, "As long as the living don't ask, the dead can't reveal information." So, the 2 of them went to the police station. However, the old policeman didn't recognize Sang-man at all and certainly wouldn't admit to taking his camera. Thinking that the old policeman might need some benefits, Juan found him again that night with gifts. Unexpectedly, the police were on duty, and his sudden appearance allowed the suspect to escape. Sangman was then imprisoned for obstructing official duties. Seeing all this was futile, Grandpa possessed Sangman and revealed a little secret known only to them. Before he could finish his words, the old policeman's attitude suddenly and radically changed. Not only did he quickly gag Sangman with food, he also threatened to release him without charge after giving him the camera. After receiving the camera, Sangman, guided by Grandpa, went to the hospital and found a friend of Grandpa's. Receiving the camera after so many years, the friend felt as if he had seen Grandpa again. He then dragged Sangman out for a few drinks, which gave Grandpa an opportunity to drink. Just as the two were enjoying their drinks, a nearby nurse reminded them that patients were not allowed to drink. Seeing the nurse's innocent and lovely face, Sangman was instantly captivated. Grandpa guessed his intentions and, in return, decided to help Sangman. He then possessed Sangman again and approached her with what he considered a dashing manner. However, his trite and exaggerated love talk was not only ineffective, but also left the nurse confused and bewildered. Though he ultimately failed to strike up a conversation, he was fortunate to have helped Grandpa fulfill his wish. Next was the lively little boy's turn. His wish was to see a superhero movie. Sangman took him to the cinema, where he unexpectedly ran into Yunsu, a nurse from the hospital. Yunsu also brought a little boy, a terminally ill patient. Sangman politely approached, intending to apologize for his abrupt approach the previous day. But the next moment, the lively boy possessed him. He'd taken a fancy to the lollipop in the boy's hand and wanted to know where to buy one. However, when Yunsu turned around, she saw Sangman picking his nose, which immediately tarnished his image in Yunsu's eyes. While watching a movie, Sangman and a lively boy laughed heartily at the film's content. But to Yunsu, it looked like Sangman was the only one giggling. After the movie, Sangman bought the lively boy a cartoon toy. While Yunsu was in the restroom, the lively boy possessed Sangman again and approached him, asking for a lollipop. However, Yunsu accidentally overheard this again and thought Sangman shouldn't be bullying a little boy like that. When it was time for dinner, they once again happened to be at the same noodle shop. The lively little boy, clinging to Sangman, feasted and drank heartily, a scene that practically terrified Yunsu, who was standing nearby. Unexpectedly, the boy, who couldn't eat, admired him deeply, which inadvertently brought Sangman and Yunsu closer. After dinner, they went to a stall together to buy some things. Sangman won a huge fish-shaped candy, and the little boy loved it. Sangman wanted to give it to him, but the lively boy was unhappy, and the two of them hid behind the car and started arguing. Yunsu, however, thought Sangman was just hiding behind the car, mumbling to himself. Yunsu thought, if he didn't want to give it, then don't give it. There was no need to act so pretentiously. At that moment, Sangman's image in Yunsu's mind completely collapsed. The third person to have a wish granted was the smoking uncle. That night, they sneaked into an abandoned parking lot and tiptoed around, searching for a car they liked. The old man even told a ghost story. Even as a ghost, he was surprisingly afraid of ghosts. Soon, they found their target car, and just as they were about to take action, they were spotted by the owner of the garage. The owner got in his car and pursued them relentlessly. During the chase, Sangman noticed that the owner was in a very bad state. After questioning, he learned that his wife wanted to divorce him. The owner suspected his wife of infidelity, but he couldn't find any evidence. Sangman promised to help him find a reason for the divorce, and he began following the wife daily. One day, he followed her all the way to the hospital. The woman had been diagnosed with cancer and was pregnant again. She had refused treatment for her unborn child and, to avoid worrying her husband, had filed for divorce. Understanding the truth, Sangman hid in a stairwell, smoking a cigarette while discussing the woman's choices with the old man. Just then, Yunsu, who had spotted him, approached. The gentle and kind Yunsu advised him to quit smoking, as the woman in question was suffering from lung cancer. She also gave Sangman a business card, saying that the boy from the previous encounter was very fond of him and hoped Sangman would come spend time with him sometime. Sangman agreed. Back at the parking lot, he told his boss about the situation. He immediately found his wife, and the two decided to face this difficult situation together. In return, he gave Sangman a yellow taxi. The uncle, using Sangman's body, drove straight to the seaside, weaving through the countryside and enjoying the gentle breeze. Though he didn't know why the uncle had come to the seaside, it wasn't until they reached their destination that Sangman realized he was seeing the ocean for the first time in his life. They arrived at a quiet beach, where they sat and chatted, listening to the crashing waves. Sangman suddenly wondered what marriage would be like. Would he still be this happy after having children? The uncle told him, of course, and that he was even happier. Going from 1 to 3 meant 3 times the joy and 3 times the enthusiasm for life. However, Sangman saw only sadness, feeling that life's pressure would triple. The uncle's solution was simple: just give birth to another child, quadrupling the motivation. The uncle then smiled foolishly and tried to embrace the ocean. Sangman, who couldn't swim, resisted. But possessed by the uncle, he couldn't help himself and ultimately followed him into the sea. Once in the water, Sangman struggled. The uncle told him to bravely face his fear of the water. After hearing the uncle's words, Sangman suddenly felt a strange sensation. This was the first time someone had taught him to swim, and the first time someone had taught him how to face difficulties. What Sangman didn't notice was that the other 3 ghosts had also arrived at the beach. The evening breeze still carried a warmth, and time seemed to slow down at that moment. On the way home, Sangman reached out the window to feel the breeze. At that moment, he seemed to understand the meaning of family, to feel the warmth of life for the first time. After years of loneliness, his heart was washed by love, and Sangman seemed to have adapted to this life. At this moment, Sangman looked at the 4 ghosts and thought how wonderful it would be if they were his family. One pleasant afternoon, they sat by the window, slowly enjoying the oversized fish-shaped candy. To better cultivate his relationship with Yoon-soo, Sangman bought a bunch of anime DVDs for her. On the way home, the uncle was smoking as usual when he suddenly saw Sangman doing the same. At that moment, the uncle felt extremely guilty, thinking he shouldn't have passed on this bad habit to Sangman, so he threw the cigarette out of the car. Unexpectedly, he was caught by the traffic police, who asked him to show his driver's license. The traffic police discovered that Sangman didn't even have a driver's license, so he was taken to the police station on charges of driving without a license. Frustrated, Sangman tried to light a cigarette to ease his nerves, but the man kept blowing out the cigarette. The 2 men engaged in a tug-of-war, a bizarre scene witnessed by 2 officers on duty. Suspecting Sangman to be mentally ill, they urged him to call his family to come and pick him up. Sangman remained silent, as he had no family in this world. At his wit's end, he remembered Yoon-soo's business card, but Yoon-soo hadn't come to pick him up until late at night. Alone in the police station, he muttered to himself, as an orphan, how could I possibly have family? Spending holidays alone from childhood, Sangman grew up in a daze, earning little, unloved, unable to remember his family, and photographs of important moments only showed him. For someone so without any family ties and aspirations, perhaps death would be the only way to find peace. What he didn't notice was that all these mumblings were overheard by Yoon-soo, who had arrived. Yoon-soo walked over to Sangman, as if to verify his deception. She placed her ear close to Sangman's chest, and for a moment, Sangman's heart raced like a galloping horse, unable to tell whether it was his heartbeat or a fluttering heartbeat. Later, Sangman learned that this was Yoon-soo's professional habit. As a nurse, she always wanted to know the heartbeat of others. Yoon-soo drove Sangman to his destination in a taxi. Back home, Sangman gave Yoon-soo the CD he had prepared. Sangman, however, was completely oblivious to the effort Yoon-soo was putting into lifting him, and even stood there waving his hands in a daze. It wasn't until the uncle reminded him that he realized what was happening and went to help. Seeing the bus carrying Yoon-soo slowly pull away, Sangman felt a sudden pang of disappointment. Unable to suppress his restless emotions any longer, he ran after it. On the bus, Sangman, finding the courage from nowhere, also slowly approached, hoping to hear her heartbeat. On the silent bus, Yoon-soo held her breath nervously, and the air suddenly filled with an ambiguous atmosphere. Finally, the tearful aunt's wish remained unfulfilled. She wanted to cook a meal for someone she loved. When asked who that person was, she burst into tears again. Sangman suggested, let's have a meal together. Unexpectedly, Auntie agreed immediately, but she also wanted to invite Yoon-soo along. After the plan was finalized, the 2 went to the market together to buy groceries. Auntie seemed like a completely different person, her face perpetually beaming. She held Sangman's arm throughout the entire process, choosing from a selection. She particularly liked water celery and bought a large bundle. That evening, Yoon-soo arrived as scheduled. Seeing the table overflowing with delicious food, Yoon-soo couldn't help but curiously ask, do you cook like this every day? Before Sangman could speak, the 4 ghosts took turns. Grandpa, in Sangman's body, said, if it's for the one I love, I'd cook this every day. Just thinking about eating face-to-face every day makes me happy. These few words made Yoon-soo blush. When Yoon-soo asked if Sangman still smoked, the uncle answered for him, as the head of the family, I'll never touch that again. The auntie nearby wasn't idle either, quickly pushing her signature gimbap over. Seeing Yoon-soo enjoying her meal, she couldn't help but burst into tears again. The lively little boy enthusiastically invited Yoon-soo to watch a movie with him. To Yoon-soo, These words seemed to come from Sangman's mouth, and she found his behavior strange. When possessed by his grandfather, Sangman was a philandering expert. When possessed by his uncle, he seemed like a lifeless, vulgar man. When possessed by a lively little boy, he became innocent and childish. And when possessed by a crybaby aunt, he became melancholy and sentimental. This constant shift in personality made Yunsu feel that Sangman was emotionally unstable and would be very tiring to be around. So, halfway through dinner, Yunsu left to go home. This was also a form of rejection of Sangman. After Yunsu left, Sangman was overwhelmed with a deep sense of loss. Yunsu was the only person he wanted to be close to, and now she was being shut out. He felt that it was all the four ghosts' fault, and that there was no need for them to stay. So he simply told the four ghosts, "You and I are not related in any way. I've already fulfilled all your wishes. You no longer need me, so leave." When Sangman woke up the next day, he found they had indeed all left. The bustling room suddenly became silent again, leaving only the uneaten fish tail and a bento box made by the crying ant. He recalled the time before, when they had lived together like a family. Though they were all strangers to him, their presence at least made the house more lively. No matter how heartwarming those past moments had been, those four ghosts were still strangers to him. Sangman continued to live a life of failure and destitution. When this thought occurred to him, his heart once again sank into darkness, and he once again entertained thoughts of suicide. This time, he decided to burn charcoal in his car. After lighting the charcoal, he sat there quietly, waiting. At that moment, a figure suddenly appeared in his mind, followed by Yunsu's beautiful smile. At that moment, Sangman realized he had found someone to care about, and at the same time, he gained the courage to survive. Thus, his 8th suicide attempt failed. After carefully dressing himself, he brought crybaby Auntie's lunchbox to the hospital. Although he couldn't offer flirtatious words, sincerity often touched hearts the most. He invited Yunsu to lunch, and this time, Yunsu didn't refuse. The two sat on a park bench, eating the kimbap that crybaby Auntie had made. As they ate, Yunsu suddenly asked, "Other people use spinach in their kimbap. Why do you use water celery?" The question was so common, so Sangman instinctively replied, "My mom said water celery is good for the blood, so I used it instead of spinach." But the next moment, Sangman was frozen in time. He suddenly regained his lost memories. The crying ant was his mother, and the seaweed rice rolls tasted exactly the same as when he was little. Back then, his mother would always lie by his side, watching him sleep. She'd even jokingly asked him at the market, "When can I hold Sangman's arm while we buy groceries?" At that moment, Sangman remembered everything, and he finally remembered what his family looked like. He then began to run home, remembering his brother's movie tickets being stolen. Although beaten black and blue, his brother had promised him that he would take him to the movies someday. He remembered his father buying a brand new yellow taxi and planning a family trip to the beach to celebrate. To capture the memories, his grandfather snatched a neighbor's camera, promising to return it as he fled. His father promised to teach Sangman how to swim at the beach, but they tragically got into a car accident on the way. His mother held Sangman tightly in her arms, and he was the only one who survived. It's often said that major disasters can cause memory loss, and from that moment on, Sangman had forgotten what his family looked like. The camera his grandfather had borrowed was found by a former police officer, and it turned out the four ghosts were none other than his forgotten family. He ran home from the hospital, crying, but his family was nowhere to be found. Sangman yelled at them to come out, not to just leave without fulfilling their wish, not to leave without a word like before. Just as he was about to be overwhelmed by the overwhelming grief, his younger brother ran out from behind and gave Sangman a toy, because he knew his younger brother would love this toy very much. Then his grandfather appeared, concerned about whether Sangman had the courage to confess his feelings. Then there was the greasy father who had taught Sangman to smoke but didn't want him to. He also taught Sangman to drive, and as long as he was there, he would definitely ensure his son's safety. Finally, his beautiful mother appeared before Sangman, crying and apologizing for leaving. Sangman asked his mother, "Can I go with you?" But his mother told him to stay alive. It turned out that they hadn't left, but had been silently by his side. Sangman burst into tears and threw himself into his mother's arms. In that moment, he felt like a child again. The family finally recognized each other, and happy smiles finally appeared on their faces. Grandpa took out his camera again, and the whole family took a group photo. With a click, the lights flickered, and the family photo was frozen in that moment. They all smiled, their lips curled up, but Sangman alone frowned and pouted, like a child who had suffered years of injustice. From childhood to adulthood, Sangman's photos were all solo, but he didn't know that his family had always witnessed important moments in his life. In the future, Sangman will live happily with these blessings. That's all for today's movie sharing. Please like, comment, and share. Thank you for your patience. Looking forward to seeing you again.